Both of them are out there doing the work. Maybe right now all they're doing is they're saying, I'm gonna set Mondays aside just to work on the business. What are some things like that when they stop listening to this episode and they go do right now to kind of kickstart strategic planning?
For starters, you don't have to go out and hire a consultant or something to come in. Here I am. This is one of the things ProFab does, by the way. Is when you're ready for that, we'd love to help you, but you don't have to start there. Just do what we did. We just sat down and we said, all right, who do we want to be? Where do we want to go? And we wrote that down. That's the start, is write it down.
Welcome back to episode 7 of the ProFab Alliance podcast. I'm sitting here with Matthew Nix, the co-founder of ProFab Alliance and the owner and 5th generation owner of Nix Companies, a 100-year-old company that grew 100x in 20 years. And last episode we left off talking about some of the struggles and obstacles that Nix Companies overcame and how those struggles made them start thinking about intentional scalability instead of just aimless growth. So in this episode, we're going to talk about intentional scalability. So Matthew, welcome back, and let's talk a little bit about intentional scalability.
Sure, yeah. So, we talked a little bit, I think, in the last episode about just growth for growth's sake and the challenges that come along with that. Not that there aren't challenges if you're not growing or if you're intentionally scaling, as we're talking about. But so really, I think the breakthrough for us was going way back to about 2016 or 17, we'd had our first offsite meeting as a senior leadership team, what has become our executive team and partners in the business. But we had our first offsite meeting, and we brought in a speaker, a guest speaker, that was the CEO of a company that had grown from a small business about our size to a publicly traded company that today is a multi-billion-dollar international enterprise. And he'd kind of come up through the ranks, and he spoke to us, and he said one of the things he said that I'll never forget was was talking directly to me. He said, Matthew, the limit to your growth is the limit of your imagination. That was one thing that always really stuck with me. And then from there, we had to really think about some things like who do we want to be? Because we can't be everything to everybody, and what do we not want to do? I think that's a really important piece of the equation that often gets overlooked. Is I read in a book once that said more companies die from indigestion than from starvation. So it's probably just as important or more important to focus on what we don't want to do and who we don't want to be than who we want to be and what we want to do. So that was our first. That was the template for our first strategic planning process. And I think that's a lot of what I want to talk about on this episode is strategic planning. And before you go, oh God, here we go, and shut this off, I just want to say, it's whatever, it can be whatever you make it, and it's been an evolutionary process for us. And it doesn't have to be as scary or as daunting as you think. When people hear strategic planning, a lot of people have some preconceived notions about that. But our first, we didn't call it that. We didn't even know what to call it. But our first strategic plan, if you will, was on one piece of paper. And the 6 of us sat around a table together, off-site for a day, and we left there with a plan. And we would meet quarterly. And I've kept this, by the way. I wish I had it here to show the audience. But I put it in my presentation every year now when we have our annual meeting where we bring all of our management team together, and I always put a screenshot of it in there. So we met quarterly, I think it was quarterly, maybe monthly, and we would go over what we said we were going to accomplish. And I took a red ink pen and marked next to all the things. We all had a copy of it. We all signed it, by the way. That was a really
Kumbaya moment or something?
No, it was a
accountability, maybe?
Yeah. We took that piece of paper and we sat around the table and we reviewed it. I think it was monthly, it might have been quarterly, but we would just mark it up with a red ink pen, and we would just hold ourselves accountable to where we said we wanted to be. We had all signed that document at the end of that day and said, this is the plan that we laid out. And it's really cool to go back and look at that. Again, 6 people sitting around a table for one day, developed a plan, our first vision, mission statement, some mid-term goals, some short-term goals, and you go back many years later and look at how many of those you've accomplished. Some we didn't, some we decided we need to go a different direction, and that's okay too. But instead of going around like a ping pong ball, at least you're kind of going like this, and you have some guardrails and you're moving in one direction. So that was really the beginning of our strategic planning process, which today starts with each year our executive team goes off site for 2 to 3 days, and we really start at the top with a vision statement and say, does that still make sense for our organization? Because if not, nothing else we're going to talk about here really matters. It's got to be in alignment with where we want to go, our vision. And usually we might tweak a word or two to kind of refine that message, but it's generally stayed the same. And then we move into talking about long-term goals and then mid-term goals. So our long-term goals are 30 years. I don't really think the number matters that much. We specifically set those because that's from when we set them up, that would be about our retirement age. And it made it more tangible for us to think about these long-term goals in terms of like, let's accomplish these before we retire. So that's why we picked that, but I don't know that number really matters. And then we moved to either 3 or 5. Right now we're wrapping up a 5-year plan, and this next time around we think we're going to go with 3. We picked 3 simply because it's long enough that it makes you think, a little bit longer term, but it's not so long that it's kind of hard to see out 5 years sometimes for real measurable goals. So then we start talking about 3-year goals, and then we have 1-year goals, and that's kind of been the essence of what's formed our strategic planning. And then from there we move into each of our division or department heads builds their own plan that's in alignment with the overarching plan, and then we start executing on that. And there's a lot more to unpack in that that maybe we can get into later in the episode.
People that might be watching or listening to this episode, they're owners of smaller shops. Are there things they could do from a strategic planning standpoint right like today that could possibly help them scale? Because most of them are out there doing the work, and they're also doing business, but they know maybe right now all they're doing is they're saying, I'm gonna set Mondays aside just to work on the business, and then Tuesday through Friday or Tuesday through Saturday they're actually still out there welding or fabricating or things like that. But what are some things like that they could go when they stop listening to this episode and they go do right now to kind of kickstart strategic planning?
Sure. Yeah. So, for starters, you don't have to go out and hire a consultant or something to come in. Here I am. This is one of the things ProFab does, by the way, is strategic planning. So shameless plug. But when you're ready for that, we'd love to help you. But you don't have to start there. I mean, it could be as simple as sitting, if it's just you, if it's a one-man band, or if it's you and a small team, just do what we did. We just sat down and we said, all right, who do we want to be? Where do we want to go? And we wrote that down. I mean, that's the start, is write it down. Hold yourself accountable. At a minimum, lay out when you're going to do it and how you're going to measure success or hold yourself accountable. At a minimum, we got to do that. So then when you go to, like you said, spending time working on the business, what you're working on and why you're working on it. So I think that is important to just tie that back to say, this is why we're doing this right now. It's moving us toward somewhere we're not, somewhere we want to go. And it could be as simple as that, and maybe it's just, one thing you want to change about the business. And what are we going to do this month, this quarter, this year to move us toward that? It's not rocket science. It's just, people, it's not complicated, but it's just hard the discipline, I think, is hard to do it.
Yeah. So let's go fast forward a little bit. Let's say someone has decided to make maybe a 10-year, 5-year, 3-year, 1-year plan, somewhere in a long-term, a short-term, and an immediate plan. Let's talk about the 1-year plan and more specific. What do you guys do during, I've gotten to go through this a little bit, the quarterly meetings, and it has helped my business to be able to have a plan for the year. And even if you don't accomplish that, you're still going farther than probably you were if you didn't have that plan. Yeah. Can you kind of talk about just what the 1-year plan looks like and what are the benefits of having a short-term, like 1-year plan?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing is it's not as if we have a 1-year plan that's separate from the 3-year that's separate from 30. I mean, it's all one plan and it all flows seamlessly throughout. One thing we've done to try to create that seamlessness in it is we did a thing several years ago. It was a breakthrough for us. We call it the realization of our vision. And we said in order to realize our vision someday, which is to create a world-class team and be recognized as a national leader in our industry for generations, we said in order to do that, what are the things that really, really matter in that? And you really boil it down to its essence. So we said we would have to have growth, we would have to maintain our culture, and we would have to have sustainability. And you could also use the word profitability in place of that. So we've tried to align all our goals around that. So we have a long-term growth goal, a long-term culture goal, and a long-term sustainability goal. And then the same for 3 and the same for 1. So to kind of create that continuity there around that. So getting down to 1 year, we're basically saying, okay, in terms of growth, what's the number one thing that we think we need to do as an organization this year to grow the company? And then in terms of culture, what's the number one thing we need to do this year to either grow or maintain our culture? And then sustainability, which could be, hey, we need to improve our profit margins, or hey, we really need to make these investments this year in this capital equipment. That's what we mean when we talk about sustainability. Some people, their minds go to solar panels and stuff, which that's all fine. But we're talking about how do we make sure that we are building our business in a way that it's sustainable for the future. So that's the essence of what's within our goals. And then, so we just say, what's going to really move the needle for us this year? What's the main thing we want to measure success against? And then underneath that becomes all these, what we call rocks, or what are the initiatives, you might call them, or strategies, and someone has to own each of those. And so there could be anything from 3 to 7 things maybe underneath those, that here's what we got to get done this year to make sure that we're going to achieve that goal. And then that's where you mentioned the quarterly meetings. That's where we're sitting down together, holding each other accountable, saying, did we do what we said we were going to do this quarter? So that at the end of the year, we've hopefully accomplished the goal. And to your point, even if you haven't accomplished the goal to the extent that you can measure it, you're so much further than where you would have been. You accomplished all these things, and you know why you did them, because it's moving you towards where you want to be.
Yeah. I think I'd like to hit on just a little bit of what you guys developed from a strategic planning process is around fabrication companies and manufacturing companies, things like that. But you guys didn't come up with it on your own. You guys kind of stole it from some other ideas, from books and things like that. Can you give me recommendations of books or anything that if someone's all right, we're not quite ready to jump into ProFab and have a consultant to help us with this strategic planning, but we do want to learn a little bit more and maybe see if we can do it internally, our own. What is something that they could learn some of the strategic planning?
Sure. Yeah, there's a bunch of resources out there. Ours is a hodgepodge of different things. We just took what fit for us and what made sense for us, and it's really, in the end, all that matters is, are you getting to the essence of who you want to be, where you want to go, and do you have a structured system that will move you along? That's really all that matters. Ours came from some board members, some of our advisory board members of much larger companies and systems that they had, the books that we've read. The EOS series is a very popular one. There's Traction is the primary book within that series. That organization pretty much does exclusively strategic planning. It's a higher end product. It's a great product, but it's not, I think the difference about us is we're exclusive to our industry. And we've kind of taken all these different ideas and concepts and boiled them down into, something that makes sense for our organization at least. But, there's a lot of Good to Great was a book that I read. It's not about strategic planning, but that's just one of the books that's been very memorable to me in terms of helping our thought process and moving our business forward. That's a whole series of books by Jim Collins. And so there's all kind of good stuff out there that can kind of help you down that path.
That's awesome. Anything else you want to talk about on the strategic planning front before we kind of move on to, we're still talking about the 100X journey. And so one of the things, first off, is there anything else you want to add on the strategic planning?
I think so first of all, it's an evolutionary process. You're not going to just sit down and say, hey, we want to do our first strategic plan and it's going to be perfect the first year. So don't freak out about that. Just keep getting better every year. Get better than you were the year before. moving the business forward. You're getting better at the process, and we've got ours, where we're pretty dialed in, but we're always tweaking it a little bit. And actually, we're getting ready to do our next 3-year strategic plan. I'm even going to bring an outside consultant in to help us, because I just want to really get a few things dialed in. And in fact, we're not doing more. We're trying to do less. So that's why I'm bringing someone in. There's an old saying. It's like, if you want me to give a 2-hour speech, I can do it right now. But if you need me to boil that down to 20 minutes, I'm going to need time to prepare for it. So getting things to the essence is hard. It takes time to do that. So we're going to bring somebody in to even help us do that. So that's one point I want to make. The second one was, I think the big thing in our evolutionary process of planning is bringing closed loop management into it. That's another thing that ProFab Alliance provides. And we have two templates for that and toolkits, also coaching on how to set this up. And what I mean is, how do you take the plan and what you said you were going to do, and how do you integrate that into all areas of the business? And the closed loop part is, we're measuring that and figuring out, not the big long-term goals, but like the everyday stuff. How are we making sure that all that's getting integrated into the everyday stuff, and that we're adjusting? So if we're here and we want to go here, when you have 150 people and you have 7 different locations, how are we making sure that we're making those changes everywhere and that we're measuring that? So our team, our leadership team meets weekly, and we've got a dashboard that we're watching all these things every week, and we put a system in place for how all that information gets disseminated up and down the organization in various different ways, through spreadsheets and dashboards and different things. And it sounds really like complicated and maybe a little bit daunting, but it's really not. I mean, our managers in like 2 minutes every morning fill out a little, dashboard that we have. And at the end of every week on Friday, it might take them 10 or 15 minutes. That's literally where, and other than our business development stuff that our sales manager does, that's where all this information comes from. I mean, it's really not complicated. It's just taking the time to put it all in place. And once you get closed loop management dialed in, it's amazing how you can put your foot on the gas with strategic planning, because now you have a pulse on what's going on, and hey, we need to adjust over here. It's not working like we thought it was working. And sometimes we just scrap the whole damn thing. Say, maybe that wasn't such a good idea, but at least we don't spend 3 years trying to do something. We can figure out in 6 months this isn't working, or we need to adjust course a little bit. So those are just a couple of, I think, key points for people to know when we think about strategic planning.
So, this episode's about intentional growth, and strategic planning is obviously a huge part of that. But for Nix Companies, we're now at that point where you guys had your struggles. You got a really strong core team, and one of the things that was unique to Nix, I think, was that you guys started doing acquisitions, that you were high growth. And you were doing it in a smart manner. And I think that would lead us to like the 3 pillars of growth. Can you kind of talk about what are the 3 pillars of growth that Nix uses to grow the business?
Yep. Yeah, and that was something that just evolved organically over time. We didn't have an aha moment in our strategic plan where we said, oh, we need to develop 3 pillars of growth. It was something that organically happened. Yes, acquisitions have been a big part of our growth journey, and that will continue to be. That's something that we're intentional about. We don't just haphazardly do acquisitions. It's a strategic part of our growth. So conventionally in business, people typically talk about growth. They say acquisition and organic. Those are the 2 buckets. We basically took organic and split it into 2 other buckets, like subsets. So that's our 3 pillars. So we have acquisition, and we have what we call innovative growth, and then just conventional organic growth. So acquisition is pretty straightforward. Everybody knows what that is. The innovative piece is, we're saying that we always want to be looking for new, innovative ways to grow the company. And the innovative word can be a little bit misleading. I mean, some of them are truly innovative. Some of them are really just, it's not like high-tech stuff, but it's just maybe starting up a new business within a business within a business, a startup versus an acquisition. It doesn't have to be a high-tech startup. It's just, it's larger things that would span maybe longer than a year, would be one way to put it, that require more planning, more capital, and so forth. And then the last bucket is the conventional organic side, which seems obvious, but really the value is just putting it in its own bucket and saying, are we doing enough? That's just replacing old equipment, making sure we're investing in our sales and marketing team, and that we're staying up with technology, and just so we got to put time, financial resources, planning into that bucket, and that bucket. And backing up to acquisitions, yes, it could look reckless from the outside looking in, but we've developed a process around that. I look at about 100 opportunities for every one that we might acquire, and that's a generalization of our funnel, but we're very thoughtful about that, and we say no to a whole lot more things than we say yes to. And the same on the innovative side. We've got a backlog of things we want to do, of ideas to start a new business within our business that's synergistic, or to really change the way we're doing things. We've got a backlog of those ideas. We only allow ourselves to take on 1 or 2 of those a year. And that's the discipline that planning brings, is that so we can come up with these ideas, and then we sit around the table together once a year in our offsite meetings, say, all right, which of these ideas fit the best within, it might be a great thing, but it might not fit right now, what we need to do right now. And which of these best fits what we can do right now, and that's going to move us down the path of where we want to go. And that's kind of how we developed those 3 pillars of growth. And it's funny how it's worked out. If you measure our growth over time, it's been about a third in there, relatively speaking. It of course fluctuates year to year, but if you aggregate it all together, it's been about a third in each bucket. I think that gives us a very healthy, balanced approach to our growth.
That healthy balance will kind of lead into our next episode. But before we go into that, I wanted to ask a little bit more specifically. You said like acquisitions. People kind of know what that is. For listeners, they know that is probably going out and purchasing a company or one that's like either adjacent to what you're doing or in a vertical that you're wanting to get into or something like that. And then organic, again, it's good that you put that in a bucket, but most people know that's actually how most businesses are growing, is organically.
Yeah, that's usually the only way, the day-to-day organic growth.
Exactly. On the innovation side, I think it might be beneficial to give an example of what's a good example of innovation.
Yeah, so one of the things we're doing, I'm going to give 2 examples. One that would be, I think, more in line with what people think of when we talk about innovation, and then the other would be something you wouldn't think of. So the first one is we've really made a big push for e-commerce lately. And so our industry is still very traditional. The channel to the market's very traditional. And we are doing that successfully. We have boots on the ground, outside sales folks. We have subject matter experts that support our sales folks, some hybrid roles too. We call those sales engineers, but it's a pretty technical sale. So they're going into these plants and they're calling on, plant manager, maintenance manager, safety manager, engineering, so on and so forth. And that's how we develop the majority of our business. And your marketing is really just branding, brand awareness, and those kinds of things. Again, pretty traditional channel to the market industry. We see the shift happening as younger generations are moving into purchasing roles and engineering roles and so forth, that the business to business sector for e-commerce is actually growing faster than the business to consumer market, which is more mature in terms of e-commerce, like Amazon. So we are trying to get out ahead of that trend because we feel like 20 years from now that the buying patterns in these plants is going to be less face-to-face, unfortunately. We still want to be there for the customers in that way, but they're just going to want to go online and buy it. And so we're really focused on that. And we're not where we want to be. We're struggling with that initiative, but we're at least saying, hey, we've got to move this direction. We have to be investing in that. And so that's been a key focus of ours for a couple of years of, build out a whole new e-commerce website. We have a person that's focused on that area of the business right now. And so that's one example. But another one, we think about innovative, was we recently have shifted some resources around within. We took 3 of our locations and shifted what we do at each of those locations around, and we're actually moving one of those locations next door to an existing location that we have now, same site, sister companies side by side, that used to be spread out by 30 miles, and just trying to streamline those processes and kind of really enhance our offering at this one facility. So, there was years of planning that went into how are we going to make all this happen. We had workforce. These businesses were 30 miles apart. We're moving them side by side now. There was workforce impacts to that with people's commute and moving big machinery from one facility to the other. And there was just a lot that went into that. So it wasn't really innovative in a sense that we came up with some new great process. It was just, that's the bucket we put it in because it's a larger project that takes a lot of time and thought. And we're basically saying we always need to be thinking about those big things that otherwise you might be scared to take on.
Either last episode or a couple episodes ago, but in case people are listening to these out of order, a little bit about your guys' advisory board. And since we're talking about intentional scalability, do we want to talk about like how your advisory board advises you guys today? Like we had talked about like how you knew that you needed outside counsel, especially when you started bringing on other owners and stuff, that you needed someone to kind of basically keep you accountable and keep the score for you guys and give you advice, obviously give you advice. But I think we could talk about now, what is your advisory board? What does their role play? And what do people on the outside not realize why you guys did an advisory board anyway?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think we touched on the why earlier in the episode, but you pretty much hit it. I mean, early on it was, accountability, just guidance, governance as we were growing the business. But yeah, we have really shifted the focus of the advisory board. Now that we've got our financials dialed in, they have confidence that we understand the financials. We have good financial reporting, financial sophistication as a company. We know where we're at on any given month, quarter, so forth. So we try to spend a lot less time about that, and really any of the measurable metrics. We still provide all the every safety KPIs and quality and customer satisfaction and all those things. We provide all the KPIs along with the financials. But I've really been intentional about less and less of the board meeting spent about that and more on the strategic side, because that's really what we want and need from them. And so we've always provided the strategic plan to them and then the annual plan. So the annual plan takes that and really boils it down. I mean, it's got the budget, the key hires we need to make, capital equipment that we need to purchase, all in alignment with that plan. And they approve the plan every year. We're taking it a step further this year. As I mentioned, we're getting ready to start our next 3-year strategic plan. We're actually going to bring the board to our offsite retreat that our executive team does every year. And I'm very excited about this. And 2 reasons. One, I know they're going to bring some great outside perspective into these conversations. Sometimes it's really important. We can't see the forest for the trees because we're in it every day. And that outside perspective can be really impactful for a good plan. But the other reason I'm excited about it is that they're no different than anybody else. And they're going to be more bought into the plan, and they're going to be more engaged in the board meetings because they had a part in creating it, right? So, we have great board members, but they're only human. I mean, you're only as engaged and I don't know how else to put it. You're only as engaged in the process as how much ownership you have in it, So handing the board a plan and saying, here's our plan, we'd like you to give us guidance on it, versus saying, inviting them in to say, help us create the plan, I think is going to be the next step for us. And so we're going to kick that off here this summer, and as we look toward the future, which I think is a great segue into our next episode, where we're kind of talking about where we're going from.
I'm actually going to say we're going something a little bit different on the next episode, and that is what everybody has experienced in the last 3 years is the pandemic.
That's right. We do have we got to go through a little.
Well, we
got to go through a little lull before we talk about where we're going from here.
So I kind of want to tease that a little bit, and me and you've talked off camera about this and why we think the listeners are going to find value on how Nix overcame the pandemic. And it goes back to when we talked about the obstacles and struggles you guys had early on in the business, which led you guys to doing strategic planning, having the advisory board, and getting your finances in check, hiring a CFO, well, at the time VP of Finance, but the CFO now. All that has worked towards just in case something bad happens. And guess what? Everybody experienced something bad happen in 2020, and that was the pandemic. And I think Nix is a good testament of, if you have your ducks in a row, you can withstand almost anything. And that's not to say that the pandemic did not hurt you guys.
Yeah.
It's that you guys came out just like you wanted to, possibly stronger than it was when you guys went into it.
Yeah.
Is there anything you want to tease about that before we go right into that?
Yeah, well, when we think about coming out stronger, and a lot of people were talking about that, I mean, depends on how you measure that. We weren't financially stronger on the other side. We are today. We've built it back, but we were stronger in other ways. And I think if we didn't have all the things you mentioned, it would have been a much different experience going through that. I don't know. I don't want to know what that would have been like. So I'm thankful we had done all the hard work leading up to that.
Awesome. So on the next episode, which will be our penultimate episode of this little series that we're doing with Nix Companies, we're going to talk about how they were prepared for the pandemic and somewhat not prepared for the pandemic, and how they kind of went through that, and that will kind of tee us up to what the future after they've reached their 100X milestone is. So stick around for the next episode.